Last month, I was short $50. Not 500, not 1,000, just 50. So I did what millions of working people do now. I split a purchase into 4 smaller payments. No interest, no problem. Or so it felt. Then payday came one day late. One payment bounced. My account dipped negative for a few hours, and suddenly that missing $50 turned into fees. Overdraft fees, late fees, stress fees. That's when it hit me. Why does being short on money feel like a punishment? Why does a tiny gap at the end of the month explode into a financial mess? And who exactly makes money when regular people fall just a little behind? My name is John, and I don't make videos for people who are crushing it financially. I make them for people who pay rent, who check their bank balance before buying groceries, who work full-time and still feel like money slips through their fingers faster than it should. Because here's the thing most financial advice gets wrong. When people struggle with money, we're told it's about discipline, bad choices, too much coffee, too many small purchases. But what if that's not the whole story? What if a big part of the problem isn't how we behave, but what we're being nudged into doing by the system around us? Today, I want to talk about something that looks helpful on the surface, something marketed as flexibility, something that promises relief when cash runs tight, buying now and paying later, and the quiet fees that kick in when life doesn't line up perfectly. This video isn't about blaming you for using these tools. In many cases, they exist because people don't have another option. It's about understanding why being short on money so often leads to paying more money, why a small delay can trigger a chain reaction, and why the people who can least afford instability are the ones charged the highest price for it. Here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll talk about the $50 problem, why small cash gaps are so dangerous when you live paycheck to paycheck. Then we'll look at how buying now and paying later actually works on your brain and why it feels easier than it really is. After that, we'll talk about overdraft fees, not as a personal failure, but as a system designed to monetize bad timing. And finally, we'll talk about solutions, not extreme budgeting, not becoming a different person, just small buffers, better rules, and ways to stop the system from charging you extra for being human. This isn't financial advice, it's financial literacy. Because once you understand the game, you stop blaming yourself for losing rounds you were never meant to win. Here's the part that rarely gets talked about. Being broke is not just about having less money. It's about having less margin. When you have savings, a $50 problem is just annoying. You move some money around, you sigh, life goes on. But when you don't have savings, that same $50 becomes dangerous. Because your entire financial life is timed down to the day. Rent clears on the 1st, utilities on the 3rd, insurance on the 7th, groceries whenever there's room. There's no slack in the system. So when something small goes wrong, your paycheck is one day late, your hours get cut, your kid gets sick, it doesn't create one problem. It creates a chain reaction. That's what people mean when they talk about the poverty premium. Not that poor people buy worse things, but that they pay extra just for being short on cash at the wrong moment. Think about it. If you have money, you pay once. If you don't, you pay in pieces. Late fees, overdraft fees, penalties for bad timing. None of these exist to punish bad behavior. They exist to monetize instability, and instability is expensive. Buying now and paying later fits perfectly into this world. It steps in right at the moment when money is tight and promises relief. Don't worry, it says, just split it up. And in that moment, it genuinely helps. But here's the problem. Splitting a payment does not change the fact that the money still has to come from future paychecks. Paychecks that were already assigned to rent, food, gas, and survival. So now you're not just managing this month, you're borrowing space from the next one. And when next month is already full, that borrowed space collapses. That's how a missing $50 becomes 100, then 150, then a notification on your phone that feels way heavier than the amount itself. The system doesn't care why you're short, it only cares that you are. It doesn't ask whether you're irresponsible. It just checks whether your balance dipped below zero at the wrong second, and when it does, it charges you for it. This is why so many people feel like they're running in place, working, trying, doing their best, but always one small surprise away from falling behind. Not because they're bad with money, but because their financial life has no shock absorbers, and when there's no cushion, every bump feels like a crash. So the real question isn't, why don't people budget better? The real question is, why does the system make tiny mistakes so expensive for the people who can least afford them? There's a reason buying now and paying later feels so harmless. It doesn't feel like debt. There's no long application, no awkward conversation with a bank, no moment where you're forced to confront a big number. Instead, you see 4 small ones: $25 today, $25 in 2 weeks, $25 after that, and one more at the end. Your brain looks at that and thinks, I can handle this. And most of the time, you're right. The problem isn't that the math is wrong. The problem is that your brain experiences the math differently. When you pay the full price up front, you feel the cost immediately. There's a small sting, a moment of hesitation. Psychologists call this the pain of paying. Buying now and paying later dulls that pain. It spreads it out. It softens it. You still pay the same amount, but it feels lighter because your brain is only focused on today's slice, not the total. And that changes behavior. You don't ask, do I need this? You ask, can I handle this payment? That's a much easier question to answer yes to. This is where things quietly start to slip, because each individual purchase makes sense on its own. A pair of shoes, a replacement phone, something for the house. But life doesn't happen one purchase at a time. Those payments stack. 4 payments here, 4 payments there, each one small, all of them due at different times. Suddenly, your future paychecks are already spoken for, not in one dramatic decision, but in a dozen reasonable ones. And here's the dangerous part. Buying now and paying later works best when your income is perfectly predictable, when your hours never change, when nothing unexpected happens. But that's not how most people live. Paychecks arrive late, hours get cut, cars break down, kids get sick. The system assumes stability. Real life delivers volatility. So when one payment hits at the wrong moment, it's not just inconvenient. It breaks the illusion that everything was under control. The payment doesn't fail because you were reckless. It fails because timing matters more than intention. And once timing fails, the fees show up. That's when people start to feel confused. I did everything right, they think. I paid on time before. I only missed once. But the system isn't built to care about patterns or effort. It only reacts to the moment money isn't there. Buying now and paying later isn't evil. For some people, in some moments, it genuinely helps. The problem is that it teaches you to manage payments, not capacity. It asks whether you can survive this week, not whether you can absorb a bad month. And when life delivers that bad month, the softness disappears very quickly, because small payments are only small as long as nothing goes wrong. Overdraft fees don't exist because people are reckless. They exist because life is badly timed. Think about how an overdraft actually happens. You don't wake up and decide, today I'd like to go negative. It happens in between things. A charge clears before your paycheck. A payment processes overnight. 2 transactions swap order by a few hours. Nothing about your behavior changed, only the clock did. And the system notices immediately. The moment your balance dips below 0, a fee appears. Not a warning, not a pause, a charge. What's important to understand is that overdraft fees are not about risk. Banks are not losing money when your account goes negative for a day. They're charging you for liquidity, for borrowing a tiny amount of money for a tiny amount of time. But the fee isn't tiny. $30, $35, sometimes more than once. You can go negative by $5 and be charged 7 times that amount. And here's where buying now and paying later quietly feeds into this. Those split payments don't know your rent schedule. They don't care about your electric bill. They don't coordinate with your paycheck. They just show up. So when one of them hits at the wrong moment, it doesn't just fail. It pulls your balance down and triggers a fee that can trigger another fee that can cause another payment to fail. This is how one small timing issue turns into a spiral. And the most frustrating part? From the outside, it looks like irresponsibility. Why didn't you keep more money in your account? Why didn't you plan better? But planning doesn't fix volatility. If your income arrives every 2 weeks and your expenses arrive every day, you're constantly exposed. The system isn't neutral here. People with higher balances rarely pay overdraft fees. They can absorb bad timing. People living close to 0 pay them often. Not because they make worse decisions, but because they have less room for error. Overdraft fees are not evenly distributed. They concentrate. They show up again and again in the lives of the same people. And once you're hit with one, your margin shrinks even more. Now you're not just short on money. You're short on money because of the fee, which makes the next overdraft more likely. This is how bad timing becomes a revenue stream. Not through one big mistake, but through repeated moments where the system chooses to charge instead of cushion. And once you see it that way, the question changes. It's no longer, why do people overdraft? It becomes, why is the cost of being early, late, or human so high? Here's the part that makes this feel unfair. This system doesn't hit everyone equally. If you're salaried, paid monthly, with savings in the bank, timing barely matters. Money can arrive early or late and nothing breaks. But most people don't live like that. Most people are paid by the hour, or by the shift, or every 2 weeks. Their income is lumpy. Their expenses are constant. Rent doesn't care that your hours were cut. Utilities don't adjust because your paycheck came late. Food doesn't wait for next Friday. So working people end up living inside a timing mismatch. Money comes in chunks, life goes out in drips. That mismatch is where the fees live. Buying now and paying later assumes something very specific about your life. It assumes stability. It assumes your paycheck will always arrive on time, that your hours will stay the same, that nothing unexpected will happen between now and the next payment. But real life is messy. You miss a day of work. Your kid gets sick. Your car needs a repair. You did not plan for. None of that makes you irresponsible. It makes you human. And yet, the financial system treats those moments as chargeable events. That's why people who work the hardest often feel like they're falling behind. They are constantly exposed to timing risk. Not because they spend more, but because they have less slack. And here's something that rarely gets said out loud. Stress changes how you think. When you're worried about money, you don't make calm, long-term decisions. You make short-term ones. You focus on getting through the week, the day, the next bill. So when buying now and paying later shows up offering relief, it feels rational. It feels responsible. Just this once, until things stabilize. But when stability never fully arrives, those short-term solutions become permanent. And the system quietly benefits from that. Fees don't come from people who are comfortable. They come from people who are stretched. From people who are doing their best with imperfect timing and zero margin. That's why this isn't a story about bad habits. It's a story about exposure. If your financial life has no buffer, every small shock becomes expensive. And the more expensive it becomes, the harder it is to build that buffer. That's the loop. Not laziness, not stupidity, just a system that charges the highest prices to the people living closest to the edge. And once you see that loop clearly, the next question becomes much more practical. How do you step out of it? Here's the good news. You don't need to double your income to escape this loop. You don't need to become perfectly disciplined, and you don't need to stop living your life. What you need is buffer. Not a huge emergency fund, not 6 months of expenses, just enough space so that bad timing doesn't turn into punishment. Let's start small. The first goal isn't wealth, it's friction. A tiny emergency fund, $100. 200 if you can. That amount won't change your life, but it can stop a cascade. It's the difference between a payment bouncing and a payment clearing, between one bad day and 3 fees. Think of it as shock absorbers for your finances. Next, you need rules for buying now and paying later. Not shame, rules. Here's a simple one. If you don't already have enough money to cover at least half of the purchase in cash, you don't use it. Not because the product is bad, but because future money is fragile. Another rule, never stack overlapping payment schedules unless you know exactly when every dollar is coming in. If you wouldn't write those dates on a calendar, you don't have enough clarity to say yes. This isn't about never using these tools. It's about using them when timing is on your side, not against you. Now let's talk about overdraft. If your bank allows it, turn overdraft protection off. That sounds scary at first, but here's what actually happens. Instead of charging you $35, the transaction simply declines. That moment is uncomfortable, but it's cheaper. Embarrassment lasts 5 minutes. Fees last all month. If turning it off isn't an option, set alerts, balance alerts, transaction alerts, anything that gives you time before the system reacts, because timing is everything. Another powerful shift is separating accounts. One account for fixed bills, one account for daily spending. That way, a mistimed purchase doesn't threaten your rent or utilities. You're not becoming more disciplined. You're reducing blast radius. And finally, change how you think about income. Most people budget monthly, but most people are paid weekly or bi-weekly. That mismatch creates false confidence early in the month and panic at the end. Instead, think in paychecks. What has to be covered by this check? What can wait until the next? This makes timing visible. And once timing is visible, it becomes manageable. None of these steps are glamorous. They won't make you feel rich overnight. They won't look impressive on social media, but they do something far more important. They take you out of the system's favorite position, exposed. closed, reactive, one delay away from a fee. Buffer doesn't make life perfect, it just gives you room to breathe. And when you have room to breathe, you make better decisions. Not because you changed who you are, but because the system stops squeezing you at every step. If you've ever felt like money punishes you for being a day late, for being a little short, for being human, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not bad with money. You're living inside a system that charges the highest prices to the people with the least margin. Buying now and paying later did not ruin your finances. Overdraft fees did not appear because you're careless. They showed up because your life runs on timing and the system profits when that timing slips. Once you understand that, something important changes. You stop seeing every fee as a personal failure. You stop blaming yourself for structural problems, and you start designing your life with buffer instead of guilt. This isn't about never making mistakes. It's about making mistakes cheaper. It's about giving yourself enough room that one bad week doesn't turn into a bad year. Wealth isn't just the number in your account. It's how resilient your life is when things don't go according to plan. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this. Don't chase perfection. Chase breathing room. Because the goal isn't to look rich, it's to live without constant financial stress. If this video helped you see money differently, share it with someone who's always just a little short. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Stories about real life, real systems, and real ways to navigate them. I don't want you to be rich on paper. I want you to be wealthy in life.